Top 6 Worst Plagues in Human History. 1. Infection, otherwise known as Hansen's illness, is a moderate preating bacterial malady that can prompt harm of the nerves, skin, eyes, and respiratory tract. Those contaminated by the illness may encounter poor visual perception and muscle shortcoming. A few patients can no longer feel torment, which may bring about the loss of extremities. The ailment has influenced people for a large number of years, yet it turned into a pandemic in Europe during the Middle Ages. As they were considered to be unclean, contaminated people needed to wear certain apparel or a chime to flag their appearance. In any case, they were taboo to go to numerous areas. It is accepted that around 19,000 outcast houses existed in Europe during this time. Called the living dead, outsiders were connected to sin and proclaimed lawfully dead by civic leaders who seized the assets of the debilitated. There are still around 200,000 instances of infection a year, however it would now be able to be cured with prescription medications. Be that as it may, a few patients need continuous treatment for confusions like visual impairment and loss of motion. 2. The Russian flu, 1852 to 1860. The Russian influenza, otherwise known as Asiatic influenza, was a fatal flu pandemic that murdered roughly 1 million individuals around the world. The flare-up began spreading in 1889 and was the biggest 19th-century pestilence of flu. It was additionally the principal genuine pandemic that occurred in the time of bacteriology. The starting cases were accounted for in Bukhara in Central Asia, Turkestan, Athabasca in northwestern Canada, and Greenland. In a half-year, the malady had contaminated St. Petersburg, Russia. Just 4 months after the fact, the flu had spread all through the northern half of the globe. Quick populous development in urban zones over the globe assisted with making a pandemic. 3. The Third Cholera Pandemic, 1852 to 1860. The deadliest of the 7 cholera episodes was the third significant flare-up that kept going from 1852 to 1860. Much the same as the initial 2 pandemics, the third started in India and spread all through Asia, Europe, North America, and Africa. In 1854, the most noticeably awful year, cholera murdered 23,000 individuals in Great Britain. Around 10,000 of those casualties were from London. During the third cholera pandemic, around 1 million individuals lost their lives. Numerous passings originated from Russia, Chicago, Tokyo, Spain, Venezuela, and Brazil. Polluted water was believed to be the reason for cholera. British Dr. John Snow followed cases in London and distinguished defiled water as the reason for the transmission of the ailment. He followed the water to the Broad Street siphon and persuaded neighborhood authorities to expel the siphon handle. In spite of the fact that the amount of neighborhood cases significantly diminished after his discoveries, the numbers kept on ascending in different zones of the world for a couple of more years. 4. Smallpox, 1520. For a considerable length of time, smallpox was a hazard in Europe, Asia, and Arabia. 3 of each 10 contaminated individuals passed on. The principal European pilgrims carried the infection to the New World, where individuals were not invulnerable to the ailment. The individuals of advanced Mexico and the United States saw demise rates a lot higher than those of the Old World. Some episodes of smallpox were viewed as plagues. Here, we'll talk about the 1 out of 1520 that crushed the Aztec Empire. Be that as it may, generally speaking, the spread of the sickness over the globe made it a pandemic. In North and South America, smallpox took roughly 100 years to obliterate around 90% of the indigenous individuals. In Mexico, the populace dropped to 1 million individuals from around 11 million preceding the European triumph. Eventually, the destructive infection helped the Spanish to vanquish the Aztecs and Incas in light of the fact that their populaces scarcely existed gratitude to the disease. Centuries later, smallpox was the principal infection pestilence halted by an immunization. In 1980, the World Health Organization announced that smallpox had been annihilated over the globe. 5. Black Death, 1347 to 1351. One of the most decimating pandemics in history was the Great Bubonic Plague, otherwise known as the Dark Death, in the mid-1300s. A dangerous episode of the bubonic plague began in China during the 1330s. As the nation was one of the busiest exchanging countries, the ailment immediately spread elsewhere. By 1347, the Black Death had shown up in Europe after a few tainted boats docked at Messina, a Sicilian port. Only 5 years after the fact, The plague had executed more than 20 million individuals in Europe. The Black Death is broadly accepted to have been brought about by Yersinia pestis microbes. The malady generally spread to individuals from the chomps of contaminated rodents and bugs. From that point, it was profoundly irresistible among humans. The plague caused a fever alongside buboes, expanding of the lymph organs. The ailment likewise delivered rosy spots on the skin that turned dark, which is the reason individuals considered it the Black Death. 6. Spanish flu, 1918 to 1920. The deadliest flu pandemic in history started in 1918 and infected about one-third of the world's population, or approximately 500 million people. Although estimates vary, it is believed that the Spanish flu killed about 50 million people, including almost 700,000 Americans. The first wave of the influenza occurred in spring 1918, and it was generally mild. The second wave was highly contagious and hit the world with a vengeance. The Spanish flu was initially seen in Europe, the United States, and Asia before spreading across the globe. Victims of the influenza were dying within hours and days of developing symptoms. The average lifespan in the U.S. had decreased by 12 years after the Spanish flu had been around for only 1 year. Schools, private homes, and other buildings became makeshift hospitals due to overcrowding in medical facilities. Quarantines were imposed, people were ordered to wear masks, and businesses were shut down until the virus completed its deadly run.